Chapter 15, The Talk. Wanyinyekevu sat at the table as the councils and all the top military officials arrived. In the crowded room, his thoughts raced. They rushed there as quickly as possible, uncertain of the emergency. Wanyinyekevu rose to his feet. The time has come. I have been ordered to send everyone under 15 years old, anyone with disabilities, and anyone over 60 years old to my hometown so we can prepare for battle. Dark Eagle stood up. I just turned 60, 2 days ago. Wanyinyekevu looked at Dark Eagle. You know better than I do. It's better to obey than to sacrifice, plus there's a reason for the order. What? I don't know, but I will obey Sabaoth, and you know those who will try to defy him will die. Dark Eagle took a seat as disappointment covered his face. Wanyinyekevu said as he, too, took a seat, our children, the disabled and elderly, have to travel clear across this nation to safety, and Sabaoth has given us 1 year to do so. The last time I recalled, there were about 4,000 children in that age group, and I'm unsure how many disabled and elderly there are. But one thing I know is they are not all going at one time. I, too, have 2 sons who will make that journey, and we need to devise a solution and a path for their safety. They need to stay in our territory as long as they can. All technology and supplies must be enough to last the trip, of course, and we must protect them at all times, so let's get it done. Elijah stood up. We have technology whereby they'll be shielded from satellite imagery, heat signature that is, but if we put a battalion of hyenas in front and behind, it would look natural, in a sense. Obey stood up. It sounds like a good idea. They will appear to be sheep, but what about feeding them? They eat at least 35 pounds of food each. Who will carry that much food for a long trip? Jayla stood up. We can talk to them as well as other animals. We can tell them to hunt for us, then go hunt for themselves while we are sleeping and stand guard. Jome said aloud, but they must stay behind once you enter Tallulah, for if anyone isn't enlightened, they will be torn apart by those hyenas. Wanyinyekevu paused. I didn't think about that. Dark Eagle interrupted. They must stay in Lake 1, Eagle Lake, or Panola Bayou. They discussed the matter at length and were unhappy about the different options. Wanyinyekevu began rubbing his eyes. Listen, word of our departure needs to go out in the morning, and the first group will leave 30 days from now. The specifics need to be determined in 2 weeks. Go home, get some rest, and we will meet again tomorrow. Looking at the time, he said. Let's say, around 1 p.m. Everyone agreed and departed. Wanyinyekevu walked toward Dark Eagle. If it makes you more comfortable, Jayla and Anaya, alongside your battalion, will go with you, but you need to put someone as your temporary replacement until you come back. I want them to meet their grandparents, and you and Aunt Isabella need a vacation, anyways. Dark Eagle smiled. Since you put it that way, I'm looking forward to returning home. Besides, I haven't been home since I left as a teenager. Bright and early the next day, Jome and Elijah had mapped out a route and stood before a projection behind them. Elijah waited for everyone to be seated. There is a tunnel system near Monterrey, Mexico, that the cartel once used, and it is a luxury one. This could be a preliminary route since our borders now extend beyond San Luis Potosí, Mexico. This tunnel system has electricity and a water system and goes as far as fingers dragging across the map. Here. Nueva Ciudad Guerrero, just south of the Rio Grande. Now that's just a bit shy of 100 miles. Jome politely interrupted. We can go underneath the river using the same system we used when we first met you in El Paso. Or, go above it. But we want to stand clear of Laredo, Texas. However, Guerra, Agua Nueva, and Falfurrias are clear of traffic. I suggest we have a small patrol to their north and south cloaked on sky crafts. Only thing is we don't what condition any of these places are in or what, until we get there. Elijah continued, that's true, so for a basic understanding after the Rio Grande, we can head towards Lake Corpus Christi in Texas, but avoiding Houston while heading south to Galveston. Crossing this stretch of water to Highway 87, keeping straight to Highway 82, to the old McFadden Wildlife Refuge will be perfect for cover and the hyenas. Elijah enlarged the map. Here, Highway 87 will turn into Highway 35. Dark Eagle suggested we head north to Lawtell, Louisiana, east to the borders of Alexander to Highway 165, Highway 4 to 17, and finally to Highway 80. It doesn't matter if they travel day or night, these children will soon be warriors. They need to see anything and everything they encounter, and it will be a learning experience as well. It was for me. Snakes and other small and dangerous insects, not just wolves and bears, and, of course, the hyenas can handle anything out there. Wanyanyekavu said, point taken and made. Wanyanyekavu interrupted, Sabaoth has enlightened everyone headed home, so group them with their powers just in case they need to fight. In fact, that goes for everyone. We are not running, we are obeying. I know many are willing to fight, so make sure they know this. It's only for a short time, but with all these people traveling, if anyone comes against us, they will be sorry they met us. Whatever route the first group takes will be the same for the rest. Start with the people to our south and work your way to us, except for Dark Eagle and his battalion. He will go with the first group because he knows our people. Horses, hyenas, and people traveling thousands of miles to Tallulah. I want one battalion to go ahead to set up rest stops every few hundred miles or so. One regiment with the group and one unit in the rear. Leave a company behind and set up camps for the next group that will follow behind them, and when the last group passes, they are to trail them to Tallulah. Afterward, all warriors will return home as soon as possible, but play everything by ear. They continued discussing the plans for another 2 hours before everything was finalized. Wanyanyekavu went home, looked at the floorboards of his basement, and removed a few pieces of wood. He grabbed his shovel and dug up the basement until he heard a loud thump. He removed the dirt and pulled out a wooden box using his hands. There, by his side, was Queen. The day has come? Wanyanyekavu said, yes, the reason your mother died. Queen sighs as he pulls a golden box out of the wooden box, and inside, wrapped in silk, were silver pennies. Wanyanyekavu carefully drilled small holes in the coins and placed leather strings through them as he turned to Queen, your necklace. Taking off her san, Wanyanyekavu replaced the leather and added a silver penny. He hands it back to Queen, then takes his necklace from around his neck and does the same. Grabbing a new metal box that Alicia made for him, he said to Queen, our DNA can only open this box here, but we have to program it first. Pricking his finger and then Queen's and placing their fingers together, a drop of blood fell in the centerpiece of the metal box, and it opened. Taking out enough pennies for their children, Wanyanyekavu placed the silver pennies in the new box, and putting the rest of the items back in the golden box, setting it into the wooden box, replacing it into the hole, and covering it back up. Queen and her brother's wives, alongside Aunt Isabella, cook a feast for dinner with everyone's favorite dish. An announcement demands that all immediate family come for an important family meeting. Dark Eagle and his wife Isabella sat at one end of the table. Wanyanyekavu and Queen sat at the opposite end. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, their wives, and all the kids sat along the edges. Dark Eagle said grace, and they all ate. After 20 minutes, Dark Eagle said, some of you know of my brother, and some of you never heard of him. This meeting is for that purpose and more. My brother, Shaka, and I are both from Tallulah, but as teenagers, we were always in competition with one another, and I guess it got out of hand, and we fell out. He moved to Ireland to live with our older brother Mal, and I moved here. There is no way I would have moved here on my own. Sabaoth set me up. Everyone laughed as he continued, but we both love Sabaoth dearly. He eventually married a woman named Lizzie and had children. One of their children was a little girl named Anaya, and her nickname was Chi, Queen's mother. Pointing to Wanyanyekavu's children, y'all grandmother. Everyone looked at Queen, and she smiled as he continued, in Ireland, they still had kings and queens and stuff like that. Anyway, their king, named King Joseph, ruled over the land. They called us this silly name, Wakatilians, and this King Joseph was simply a Compuyutan's man that sucked up to the Abenians, and they gave him this title, but it meant nothing to nobody but him. He was nothing more than a man who hated any authority other than his own. He was a cold-hearted, self-centered, arrogant, and drunken whoremonger until he met your grandmother, Chi. Chi was from the Kamaria clan there in Ireland. Her likeness to your mother was that of an assertive Wakatilians woman who would not settle for less than what she deserved. King Joseph often made trips to southern Ireland for their wine, fine liquors, and homemade beers. Winking at Aunt Isabella. She was a Wakatilians, and it was illegal to marry one during that time. As a matter of fact, it still stands today. The only way you could have one was to be a slave, but he pursued Chi. However, she resisted his seduction and refused to become his concubine. Her embarrassment of her sister, Ella, who was already one of his concubines, and her desire to become a great leader for her people led her to reject all his advances. The king's desire to be with her grew because of her rejections, and how she conveyed them made the fool pursue her more. He had changed his whoremonger's ways so he would be free to marry Chi when it became clear to Abney A23, an elite Abenians who governed this section of the world. King Joseph was trying to marry a Wakatilians. Abney A23 demanded that he stop his silly games, but out of drunken anger in his contemptuous way and, of course, a little time dealing with a woman like Chi, King Joseph eventually married Chi, made her queen, and granted her the greatest of the great maiden peers of old Ireland. What does that mean? I don't know, some formal acknowledgement of her historical position. Wanyanyekavu looked around and noticed everyone was paying attention, even Abooksigun, who is typically distracted and shows little interest, but he had his mouth opened and, for the first time, saw something that interested him. Wanyanyekavu asked, "Are you listening, Abooksigun?" Abooksigun? Typically, he would answer and repeat everything a person said. Abooksigun shook his head and said nothing as he listened to Dark Eagle. Shortly afterward the marriage, Abney A23 decreed sentences of excommunication against King Joseph. The first time there was a division between any Compuyutans and the Abenians, which brought its lands under the Compuyutans' control instead of the Abenians. They crowned Chi Queen of Old Ireland, and she gave birth to her only child, Princess Anaya, your mother. Abooksigun raised his hand, but asked before Dark Eagle could recognize him. My mother is a real princess, no, a queen. That makes us royalty. Am I a prince? Dad, you're a king. Wanyanyekavu smiled, we are, in more ways than one. Everyone looked at Abooksigun in awe. Dark Eagle said, yes, and who are you? And where is the nonchalant Abooksigun that we know? The Abooksigun who's not interested in anything. Everyone laughed as Dark Eagle continued, Anaya's gender disappointed Joseph. He was not entirely discouraged, for he said a son would surely follow. He loved Anaya for a while but wanted a son to succeed him. Once your mother was born, they went through some formality like a ritual, made formal announcements, and documented her birth in royal charters, ceremonies, and this and that. Wanyanyekavu saw Dark Eagle's food getting cold. Finish eating, Dark Eagle, I'll finish. Dark Eagle said. Thanks, my food is looking at me, and I'm looking at it. Pass the hot sauce. Wanyanyekavu smiled. They issue 5,000 silver pennies minted to mark the royal birth. Taking off his necklace. Here's one, passing it around the room as he continues, in keeping with traditions. As she left the royal hospital, she appeared on the building steps with her newborn for the public to see the baby. These ceremonies lasted for days before Chi's family headed back home. Chi's father, Shaka, approached her with tears in his eyes. Formletzi had appeared before him the night before. Abooksigun interrupted, this is the same man you asked me about, isn't it? Wanyanyekavu said, no, that was Yael. Abooksigun said. Oh, okay, go ahead. Wanyanyekavu laughed so hard as he looked at Abooksigun. Thank you, Abooksigun said, no problem. trying to remember his thoughts. Oh. Shaka told Chi he would return in 8 months and take the baby. She ended up here in Arizona and instructed her to tell no one, not even her uncle. Mal, for even he had sold his soul to the devil for greed. He wanted all royal documents of her birth. He continued pulling out those documents and showing the family. And 200 silver pennies. She agreed, and after 8 months. Abooksigun had got lost in the story, and Wanyanyekavu asked, "Did she make it, Abooksigun?" Abooksigun looked at Wanyanyekavu. "Pops, she is sitting right next to you, quit playing." Wanyanyekavu shook his head and Queen laughed, "I'll take it from here. My mother, Chi or Anaya, never saw her daughter again. With help from her sister, the concubine, Chi was falsely investigated for high treason by the Abenians and the Computans. She was arrested and sent to the Tower of Ireland, where she was tried by her ex-fiancé, Akai, and her uncle, Mal, and found guilty. According to old Ireland laws, she would spend her life in prison, but to please the Abenians, she was beheaded days later. Her charges against her were adultery, incest, abandonment, and witchcraft. After a formal apology from the king, old Ireland united with the Abenians once again, the Wakatilians of Ireland, and though life in Ireland was cruel toward the Wakatilians before Chi, it became even worse toward them afterward. Both the Abenians and Computans took revenge on the Wakatilians. It was so bad that they started immigrating to the Americas. Abooksigun asked, "Ireland has been around for centuries now. Why do they call it Old Ireland? Shouldn't it be New Ireland?" Queen smiled, "I can't tell you that one. But I do know the indigenous people of Ireland were originally Wakatilians." Dark Eagle, listening to Abooksigun and Queen, said, "Well, you know, me and my brother made amends and realized it was God's will that he moved to Ireland for the sole purpose of her birth." They talked for a bit longer before everyone cleaned up and headed home. Wanyanyekavu stopped his children, "I need to speak to you a little longer before you head off." They all waited while Wanyanyekavu went upstairs. He asked everyone to take their sand necklaces off as he came down. Going around to each of them, he took off the sand, handed them a new leather rope, replaced the sand, and added a silver penny. "Everything I'm about to tell you, tell no man but your children, for there is a reason for all this, and you will know when it's time." Passing each one a stroll and explaining to them what Mletsi explained to him, about his ancestral roots and his family were from the first man, Adam. After a few hours of talking, he paused and then said, "The 2 youngest will go to Tallulah, and most of them there have not been enlightened as far as I know, and they will not understand this because I am the first. Again, as far as I know, but you must now know what I know." He paused and handed the last necklace to his youngest son, Ntwadumala. Wanyanyekavu took a seat and opened a book already at the table. "This book is from that stroll that I just handed you. It's our family tree and reads as follows." Wanyanyekavu read the book naming the genealogy of his family tree. Abooksigun just sat there, absorbing the words as they came out of Wanyanyekavu's mouth. The family could not believe what they had heard. Mixed emotions of being shocked, surprised, and overwhelmed took the family by surprise. "That's what you meant when you said in more ways than one," said Abooksigun. "We are descendants of Adam, Isaac, Jesus, David, everyone in the Torah. We are the lions of Judah." They talked for hours before they knew it was the next day. After everyone left, Abooksigun and Wanyanyekavu spoke for many more hours, and it made Wanyanyekavu proud to hear how interested he was in learning his bloodline. Wanyanyekavu grabs Abooksigun and tells him to sit down. "If you don't remember any of this, remember this," Wanyanyekavu said confidently. "You are not and will never be greater than anyone, and you're damn sure aren't less than anyone. Remember that being humble is what you were called to be more than anything else." Wanyanyekavu gives Abooksigun a book of his poems and tells him, "These are my words, and I know you have the Torah in your heart. These are words from my heart, use them, understand them and learn from them as I did." You see, a man learns from his parents' experience, and the family becomes better as the generations grow, and the last man should be greater than the first through his pain and his growth. Each generation should be better than the last one, so remember, with great pain comes significant change. So, if you know to do right, son, why not do it? The time had come for everyone in the southern region to descend upon Monterrey, Mexico. As everyone headed east to Ciudad Apodaca, Nuevo Leon, the sun was about to set. There stood a tunnel that had been cleared and inspected, and they had made a few recent modifications. The first travelers stood there patiently, comprised of 4 battalions, roughly 1,500 men, 3,500 children, 200 elders, 24 hyenas, 1,000 horses, hundreds of hovercrafts, and 14 sky crafts. Wanyinyekevu stood before them and was amazed as he spoke. I had no idea we had grown to such length. How are all these people supposed to live in Tallulah for such a short time? Only Sabaoth knows. Is this the first group? How many groups are there in total? Obe looked at Wanyinyekevu. 5. Wanyinyekevu signed. They will have to live along Highway 165 from Tallulah to Lake Providence. That'll be our entire community. Sabaoth is able. Obe shook his head. Yes, Sabaoth is. Standing in front of the crowd, he grabs a loudspeaker. May I have your attention, please? We can only go as fast as our weakest person, and since there are babies here with our elders, don't try to outdo yourselves. We have plenty of time, and we have Sabaoth on our side. Let's try to be patient and understanding. This will be an adventure. Most of you have never left this place, and some haven't been outside our territory since it became ours. So, watch out for one another. Sabaoth gives your gifts and talents, use them. That's why Sabaoth gave them to you, they are yours to keep. Once again, I have to say this. We are not running, we are obeying the word of God, for we are all soldiers and warriors of God. The crowd cheered as he continued. Now go. Am I my brother's keeper? The crowd shouted. Yes, I am. 2 speedsters left to the tunnel's edge and called out to the rest once they arrived at the other end. The area is secured and ready. Anaya and her hyenas took the lead, followed by her company. Family members hugged and kissed their family members as they headed toward the tunnels, saying their goodbyes as the elderly and children followed Anaya. Infants, some of their siblings, and the remaining elderly got on hovercrafts. They descended the tunnels, followed by Jayla, who had Nwadumala on her horse as her company of hyenas and men followed next. Lastly, the men and their sky crafts hovered down in pairs until the last one could not be seen. The tunnel descended at a 45-degree angle for half a mile, then became straight for a quarter of a mile, before falling again at a 45-degree angle for 2 miles, and then it became straight for the rest of the way. The system was well lit once they passed the first descent, and for every mile or so was a manufactured pond with fresh water. This route followed Highway 54, with signs telling them what was ahead and above them written in Spanish and English. The kids complained after the first hour, and the elderly seemed to use the bathroom every minute. Anaya called on her earpiece. Pops, you need to bring more hovercrafts. The children and the elderly are complaining about being tired already, and we've only traveled for an hour, Wanyinyekevu responded. Get to Ciudad Cerralvo, we will bring as many as we can there. I see now it's going to be a long trip. Call ahead to the speedsters and tell them to keep their eyes peeled and go ahead and set up camp there, it's going to be a while. At this rate, traveling at night and sleeping during the day. It's going to take roughly 80 days to get to Tallulah. The second group will leave when you arrive at the halfway mark, so in 30 to 40 days, he paused and then sighed. It is what it is, handle it, over and out. Dark Eagle, Jayla, and Anaya became frustrated along the tunnels as the complaints from the children and elderly grew. They waited on the men to bring more supplies and better transportation for the people. Above ground, a group of men brought as many hovercrafts as possible and took the horses back to the camp on the following day near Ciudad Cerralvo. Since they were in the tunnels, they continued until they finally reached Nueva Ciudad Guerrero. They had timed the journey to where they would approach the area by sunrise so the speedsters could go to their next destination. Jayla and Anaya let the hyenas hunt for food as the rest of their battalion went fishing in the nearby Rio Grande River. The people stayed near the mouth of the entrance and set up their camp there. Dark Eagle and his battalion prepared campfires and ensured everyone was accounted for. Once everyone had eaten, the entire base rested while a few stood guards over them. 2 days had passed, but they were out in the open, so many were on high alert. There was plenty of food left, so one technician made a makeshift refrigeration system for the next group to enjoy the rest, and they did this along the way when possible. When everyone was well rested, the warriors began checking the cloaking devices as they mounted on their sky crafts, keeping at least 2 miles north and south of the group as they directed a clear path. Before long, the people complained again. "I can imagine what Moses felt like now," said Anaya. They traveled to Guerra, Texas, and rested there for a while, but the speedsters continued and traveled to Agua Nueva. As planned, the speedsters went a few miles ahead of them. Since this was the first group, they expected disappointments and confusion, but Jayla and Anaya confidently led the group. They journeyed to Falfurrias, Texas, then to Orange Grove, Texas, a brief stop in Mathis, Texas, then headed south to Corpus Christi, Texas. Some journeys were long, and some were short, but no enemies were in sight. After leaving Corpus Christi, they called back to camp on a secure line to contact home base about whether it was safe to send the next group. They discussed their itinerary as they continued along Highway 87 to Highway 82 to reach the Old McFadden National Wildlife Refuge in Louisiana.